Can't get this ecom business to run. It's been about 2 years on and off. Stuck on the Google setting up a Google Merchant Center. You know, if you've done ecom, those words are gonna already trigger your PTSD. Something tells me that the only reason it's not working is because how much will change. If I can produce this live running high ticket ecom store. It's a lot of potential. I mean, when it was live, we did about 5 or 6K just in organic sales, purely organic. About just over 50% profit margin. And then I was running ads on different platforms. I tried different search browsers, tried a couple different campaigns on Bing, just to test. I was desperate for data. Then managed to produce another 5-6K before that account got banned. It's like the universe isn't convinced. You know, it's not going to give it to me. This isn't Google. This isn't a problem this is not a tech issue. You know, this isn't a policy misrepresentation issue. This is a cosmic dilemma. I've reached a crossroad intersection in the multiverse. And I'm confident to take and enter into the reality that I believe is true. But every time I approach it, it like just evaporates. The universe is like, nah, I'm not convinced. You still need something, which I do. I do need something, which is, you know, the unwavering pursuit of my desired reality and identity, which is a fair need. The desire comes from my divine unconscious. It's coming from the universe itself. You know, ecom is a method to use in which you can help your consciousness, you know, you allow it time to transcend the superficial boundaries of life through business, right? In most of our history and our culture, from ancient times, from primitive times to medieval times, through all the ages, humans never really had to work to survive. They were already living, so they had time to transcend consciousness. What's the result, you reckon, huh? Primitive cultures. Well, boom, you got the pyramids. You got the Roman Empire. I've hired the best possible agencies in the country, the best agencies in the country. Haven't tried any US agencies. They all want thousands of dollars, you know, with no guarantees, obviously. They won't guarantee to lift the suspension on the account. You know, if you really understand entrepreneurship, it's not about business. You know, all you hear from all these billionaire businessmen and entrepreneurs, I mean, they are entrepreneurs, but it's all they talk about, business. I mean, I love them because I learn a lot from them. I learn business. Watch Gadji, you know. He's got the business mind of an 80-year-old corporate billionaire. 100%. I don't give a fuck what anyone says, man. I don't care what any YouTube bozo, you know. I know guys that have met him. And, you know, they've done business with him. Obviously, he's flawed, you know. Obviously, these guys are, you know, workaholics. They're so focused on their maximum business potential, which transcends, I guess, you know, in a way, the superficial does transcend their human ego, but it just always comes back to business and maths. Look at Hormozi. The guy's like he's a mathematician. The maths in Hormozi trickles down into his training method at the gym. He's so mathematically precise with his workout routines, you know. He's just maximum efficiency. Not an ounce of energy wasted. But I don't believe entrepreneurship even addresses, the pursuit of successful entrepreneurship is not business related at all. It's spiritual, man. It is spiritual. It is your identity. It is your character. It's a mirror. Try and deceive a mirror, or try and convince a mirror otherwise of the reflection. Try and tell the mirror that it missed something. The universe is completely unconscious. You don't have to be a fucking professional, clinical, psychodynamic, integrated psychoanalyst to understand that you can become unconscious. But what's the universe? I've got to give it to these speakers like Neville Goddard, Alan Watts, before YouTube, before the internet, they realized this, Carl Jung, they remembered this. They didn't learn anything. They didn't really discover anything. They were the first to remember. The recollection. They didn't prove anything. They didn't create anything. You don't create. Everything's already created. The universe is created. Energy is already created. All you can do is transmute it. You transmute your psychic projection of abundance. There's a deep level of conscious abundance in you. You project that outwards, externally, right? It turns into physical objects, right? You didn't create those physical objects. You didn't even create abundance. You didn't create anything. Nothing is created. That's entrepreneurship to me. And I think that's the reason why I became alive in a country where, these regulations, in Australia, for e-commerce brands, retail businesses, there's no such thing as drop shipping. In Australia, there's no real commercial regulation on a business model called drop shipping, right? There's a huge retail market in Australia. Retail, okay? But the Australian regulations only allow Google to represent businesses who stock their own inventory. So the wholesaler becomes the retailer if they want to sell their own product online. So there's no such thing as drop shipping, which is what I gave up on years ago anyway, 3-4 years ago, right? I had a store, low ticket store, just running it on like Meta ads, Facebook ads, just to get my head around the whole business model. I immediately, as soon as I could possibly wake up, decided that the only way really to run an online business efficiently is high ticket, right? In Australia at least. This policy just drove me to, honestly, it's a defeating, It's not that you give up like on the business model. I just, I've put it on pause. Like, this is easily over my 10th attempt at this policy, right? Now, trying to get listed on Google. Probably more, like 15 to 20 attempts, right? And every time I put the whole business, I just chuck it in the back seat, and just kind of let it sit there until something changes with Google. Last year, regulations definitely have eased a lot. They have eased a lot, right? You just need to register the business in your name, your identity. So your supplier, doesn't matter if it's really coming from overseas, but Google will not approve your store with more than a 5 to 7 day shipping time. If it's 5 to 7 days, you consider it a dropshipper. If it's more than 5 to 7 days average. So if you find a local supplier and a business and an address, a commercial address, if you know what I'm talking about, you're going to be relating. If you don't, you're not, like, I don't know what you're doing. I don't, honestly, go back to work or... The thing that's defeating it's not the policy itself, it's how far ahead these regulations are. They're ahead of you, man. The government's ahead of you. The government is... if you're unconscious, they're probably 60 steps ahead of you. If you're top 0.1% consciousness, they're probably still 10 to 15 steps ahead of you. That's if you're at your highest potential awareness, which is 1 in 20 to 30,000. I like talking numbers. I love talking numbers. I love just talking realistic numbers. I could be watching a fucking fictional anime. I'm watching Blood of Zeus right on Netflix. It's this dramatized mythology, Greek mythology series. It's pretty dramatized. I don't know. I like it. It's cool. There's a lot of cool things I like about it. It's a really Netflixy kind of, very, you know, dramatized. I mean, I'm the guy calculating, these gods and these mortal beings. I'm like, yeah, he's got to be 5'10", 5'11". Zeus has got to be what? He's standing. This guy's under his chest. Zeus is looking at, close to 7 foot, if not higher. Serratus is, Serratus is visible. At that height, at that weight, I'm thinking we're over 300 pounds at under 10% body fat. I'm calculating. I'm putting numbers to the screen. You know what I mean? I'm calculating. I'm interpreting. You know what I mean? He throws lightning bolt, some other creature flying in the air. I'm calculating the speed that creature, that Pegasus, that the demigods ride on. I'm like, he's going up those waves. He's got to be what, a couple meters above the water. He's traveling. He's doing at least 200 knots ground speed. I don't know how I'm going to get around this. I want to, man. Maybe I want it too bad. Maybe I need it too bad that, it's going to harm my identity if this reality that I want becomes confirmed, If it becomes confirmed and I build this business and I run it and all of a sudden I'm not the man that, I believe I am. Maybe that reality is too harmful or too dangerous for me. I'm not, selling myself some kind of, comfort or cope. You know what I mean? I'm just thinking about it on a spiritual level, honestly. Because I had to do a lot of work before I ever approached, entrepreneurship again, really. In terms of everything, mindset, identity, character, lifestyle, habits, business. It's been a year and a half, 250 hours plus in psychodynamic psychotherapy. I finished Introduction to Object Relations, Imes Kohut, Drive Theory, Cohesive, Self-Object Relations and Cohesion. So there's drive theory, attachment theory, self-object relations, cohesion, psychology, which is self-psychology. So we look at the three fundamental approaches of self-psychology from Freud, Jung, and Adler. Man, there's been a lot of work, so much tremendous amount of depth, the amount of depth and effort, and digging and digging and digging, the amount of work I've done on my mental state. I'm not trying to put a gauge on it. I leave that up to the analysts. For me, I just try and, understand the progress. But it's hard. You can't really understand your own progress because you're not conscious to who you were. If your identity is really shifted, right? You don't really feel healed. You don't feel healed. Because the level of peace and fulfillment that you reach it's a new reality, so you can't remember the old reality. If you can't remember it, then you don't remember how painful it was. That's really what is happening, And look at the process of individuation. It's specifically related to the unconscious. Stuff you never knew was there. It was there. It was there, but you just, the veil, you had the lenses in your eyes, cover it. It reminds me of the narrations in the Islamic tradition about, the people that enter the paradise, the Jannat, the gardens, and they're asked, these are the people that were saved from the torment, and they're asked when they get to the gardens and they get to paradise, how long were you in there? And they say it felt like, in some narrations, barely an hour, barely. I remember it was like these Arab traditions. There was like this reference of some animal, like the blink of an eye or something. They can't even remember the torment. So it was a very defeating week and weekend, and I'm not going to deny it, because the point isn't to just remain, compulsively positive, optimistic. You can be optimistic, but if you're compulsively optimistic, that's a delusion. Where's the line? Take defeat, take a loss, go, grieve it out, go externalize it, you externalize it, give your ego a chance to fucking recognize the amount of energy, if you are able to externalize it, you might get, if you are that mature, you can externalize this and turn, 20% body fat into 15%, in a few months, right? That's energy, man. I mean, you suffer defeat and lost, disappointment. You don't know that, the level of energy. So, if you externalize it in an immature way and you become violent, that amount of energy, you could probably run through buildings, charging. It's a lot of energy. That's what I'm trying to say. The amount of energy it's a rage of built up pressure. The rage is coming from the primitive aspect of your being. So if your ego is too arrogant to recognize it as a necessary energy that has to be externalized in a healthy way, then it will externalize in a compulsive way. Become a drug addict, or you become a top 0.01% athlete. So I just externalized the energy. I spent the whole weekend with a good friend, one of my closest friends. She's a friend, but I really I spent the weekend with her. Saw family as well. Just went and saw family, Saw mum, went and spent some time, with my nieces. I'm grateful for the family. I'm grateful to have them. And I spent the day with, she's a friend. I've told my mum a lot about her. She's older. She's very mature. The most mature person. The most mature female, I'll give her that. The most mature female, she's been through it. Single mum, divorced, went through the courts, and still going through the courts, and the drama. It's been really intense. She's had a very intense period. I admire her so much and I respect her so much. More than she probably respects herself, She's so conscious of her flaws, And it's normal. We see our flaws as really problems, She's starting to become conscious of her symptoms, and it's obviously, causing a lot of anxiety because she's so conscious. Her level of emotional awareness is so, painfully deep, the burden that she carries, because she's aware of her behavior. So her symptoms, people don't know. That's the point of pathology. the compulsion implies that it's unconscious. So if you're acting out in a pathological, harmful way, and then you become conscious to it then and there, that's hard. You know, without a therapist, without an analyst telling you know, helping you to become conscious. You're already conscious to it because we're all, you know, human beings. We all have that tool, right? Not everyone has access to it, but we all have it. You know, the diagnosing tool, to the problem finder, you know. There's a tool that we're given to diagnose the problem and then address the problem. She becomes more aware of it, and it's you know, it brings her, just like anyone, you know, obviously a lot of stress, anxiety. They're symptoms, you know, they're not flaws. They're not problems. I mean, they're problems, but it's not really your problem. Your symptoms aren't your problem. Your problem is figuring out how they're affecting your life. You know, you didn't give yourself those symptoms. You were placed in an environment that produced those symptoms. Right? Seems unfair, but there's a caveat. If you can point them out, well, you want your peace, right? You want your fulfillment, you want your maturity, you want your wholeness, you want your enlightenment. Then find the most painful thing, you know, in your life. Yeah, I spent the weekend with her. I've spoken a lot about her as well in the therapy. You know, when I was talking about the conscious sexual, the anima, you know, there's a lot of things that she possesses I believe of my feminine true self. And I don't know if that's gonna, it's not gonna make sense to you maybe, but from a psychological perspective, if you look at who I thought my animal was, you know, a previous projection, this person could not be more opposite. You know, she's older now, you know, she's in her 40s. Who knows how she was 25 years ago, right? It's a traumatic upbringing. The identity now matters. Not the age, not the biological, anything. It's, you know, the maturity, the identity that she fulfills, that you fulfill now. That is an embodiment, you know. I don't know if she's already sensed it, you know, my mum definitely has. I've brought her up to my mum a lot, brought her up to my analyst a lot. You know, they both said the same thing. They think I love her. Obviously, there's love and there's care, you know. I'm trying to work out I'm realizing that I'm in love with the embodiment of my anima, you know. And the thing is, it's through her conscious ego, so it is her as an individual, you know. If you love the individual that's embodying a true aspect of yourself, right, then you love the individual. And the opposite is true, right? Like my first real relationship. If you're falling in love with a projection, right, it's not an embodiment, right? I can't fucking put it superficially. I can't put it superficially. You can put it superficially, but you gotta write 2 paragraphs really to explain maybe a couple of sentences psychologically. Right? If you're trying to explain them superficially, you're doing 10 times the work, and you probably still can't get the message across. You can't communicate. What I fell in love with in the past was a projection. So if that person the love would only carry out so long as that person could embody that projection, right? The ego of that person is a very, very, very different identity. It is not, you don't know that person. You know, your projection is not even human. It's not human. So you project that onto a human, then your subconscious doesn't, you know, it doesn't detect. It doesn't detect. It's blindfolded. It's like a radar, right? It doesn't see the human. It just detects. Sorry. It just detects energy. It detects identities. Okay. And if it's registering, you know, and it's indicating and it's going towards an identity, it doesn't know any better. It doesn't know that that identity is a projection, and that the actual person behind that projection is not the person you're falling in love with. So when you're falling in love with that projection, by you loving the person, you think you love the individual, right? And I'll tie this back into, you know, my friend, the healing aspect of finding this kind of relationship, right? But back to the projection. You fall in love with a projected part of your true self. And then all of a sudden the person can no longer carry the weight, because no human can. No human can carry the full weight of divinity. They can't. Well, they're not supposed to. The ego isn't supposed to carry the full weight. But here's the unforgivable thing. They will try to. while you remain unconscious, right? That's the unforgivable part. That's the abusive part, you know. That's the part where it turns into psychological, you know, I can't say it, you know, grape, right? Rhymes with grape. By you projecting your true self onto them, see, this is the justice of the universe. Though. This is how the universe works, the governance, right? Al-Mulk, as it's talked about in the Quran, right? You project your true self onto this person. Right, you've split it off, so you're not acting out in your true self. Right? They're not acting out in their true selves either. But the difference is that they are shifting their identity to fulfill the projection. Okay? Your projection is a hologram. It's empty. Okay? If they can fulfill that profile, it's like a character profile. Right? Think of like any like first person or third person fighting game, you know, and you're selecting characters. Okay? And you know the characters locked. You know, there's locked characters, and you just see the outline, the figure, right? You're playing the game, and you know that this character identity, this is the character that you need to win. Okay. Someone on the other end, right, has a scan. Okay, I see this person. I can see the projection. I mean, they can physically see it. They can physically see. They see the projection. They say, oh wow, he's projected onto this hologram, right? The hologram is separate from them, guy or girl, okay? It's separate from them. It's not them. Your projection that you split off from your unconscious, from the back of your head, and it's split off, right? That is not their identity. That is an aspect of your true identity. But they are so emotionally aware that they can, identify as that projection, right? In most cultures, medieval cultures, it's called witchcraft. It's wizardry. It's shapeshifting. They didn't have any other word for it. There was no psychoanalysts. Psychoanalysis is just over 100 years old. Think about it now. How old is human history? For 99.999%, there's 6 decimals. Only now we're understanding what the fuck happened, okay? So that person identifies with your projection. They have to turn into their false identity because your projection is not their true identity. So they will have to shift identities and they will have to externalize their identity to fulfill your projection, okay? Now, when they fail to maintain that identity, the mask cracks open, splits open, and you get a glimpse, and you're like, what the hell? That's not how my queen reacts. That's not how my feminine self would react in this scenario, My feminine self wouldn't go to this place, you know, on a Saturday night, my feminine self wouldn't post on Instagram. How dare you? What's wrong with you? How dare you not identify as my projected deity, my feminine goddess? It's objectification. It's pedestal. Pedestal? That's not a human being. It's a goddess. Only gods and goddesses belong on pedestals, not humans. So, when the mask splits open and the projection collapses, right? Two things happen. The opposites now become conscious to each other, right? It's the most traumatic thing. Don't get sucked into the debate about male and female, masculine and feminine, who's more traumatized. That's vanity, right? Years ago, I used to think, the masculine or the males, and then it was the females, and then, it's vanity, honestly. The most traumatized is the true identity, obviously, okay? Because they were unconscious, right? The false identity isn't traumatized at all because they were conscious to what was happening the whole time, right? So nothing really entered their ego, right? The true identity, their universe collapsing, right? Their whole reality collapses. When they project the universe, they project a certain reality, and then that reality, the universe rejects that reality. That's what we call in psychotherapy the apocalypse. Anyway, so two things happen. The projected version of the true identity is not necessarily withdrawn, right? It's lifted. You can say it's suspended, it becomes suspended. It's partially withdrawn, but it's not integrated back to the true person, okay? It's alienation, right? The person becomes slightly aware of their true identity, and then the false identity that was fulfilling the true person's projection, right? So both identities become exposed. Do you see how the universe works? And we can just put it in simple terms, you know what I mean? You can just put it superficially and realize that, the narcissist realizes that, what do they call it? The empaths, the empaths seek the narcissist in the relationship, and the narcissists have to seek the empaths that can mirror their narcissism, and they both confirm each other's identities. It's true. One is confirming a true identity, and the other is confirming a false identity. So when the veil is lifted, right, one realizes their true identity, and the other is forced back into their true identity, right? The true one realizes the false, right? That's what happens. Now, if you're good, and if you're mature, and if you're strong, and if you decide to, you can withdraw the true projection and integrate it back and claim it back. It's your inheritance. Claim it back for yourself, right? Male or female, right? In most cases, you will withdraw that projection, and you don't have the your ego doesn't have the cohesiveness to integrate it back, So you'll split it off again and find the next candidate to carry it, right? Most cases end in a repetitive compulsion. So back to what I was saying about my feminine friend, who's very dear to me, and she's in her 40s, and I told my mum, I said, Mum, she's the most, and my mum doesn't hear compliments, she doesn't hear me talk about females. My mum is she gets concerned with my lack of interest, these days in females, and she thought it was too good to be true, because the way I was talking about it, I had to remind my mum, Mum, she's an older woman and she's a single mum, and, I'm like to my mum, she's the most beautiful female I've seen over the age of 30. She's in her 40s. And I think, maybe I see her as more beautiful because I'm aware of what she's had to go through to maintain that. Not physically, she hasn't done, work to herself. I'm talking about maintaining her sanity. You know what I mean? It's crazy. You go through an abusive divorce and you know how it is. Whatever, toxic breakup and court systems and, custody. And, so it's the admiration goes up, I think entrepreneurship is it's appreciating relationships. Valuable relationships. I'm just psychologically aware enough to understand my relationship properly with people, like this, and why I'm not attached to my love anymore, I can love and appreciate and admire from a distance. I'm no longer interested in objectifying what I love and who I love. Who I love does not have to become an object that embodies my identity. They don't have to carry an aspect of my true self. That's an objectification. They become their own selves, separate from you. They decide what they want to do. That they are their own autonomy. Autonomy is independent from you, right? This is the self-object relationship, okay? If your self-object becomes independent from you, right? In a healthy way, they're no longer your self-object, your true object. Sorry, your true self, right? An object of your true self. So if you can separate from that object and remain as your true self, now you can love the person while them not representing any aspect of your identity. That is I think, how it should be. You love them for what they have identified as. That's what's healing. And that's why I'm talking about it. For over an hour. I don't know what I'm gonna do at the store. I was too anxious. It's too anxious. When there's anxiety, then there's too much dependency on it. I want there to be dependency. I don't really want to depend on a business itself. I depend on the lifestyle that I need to provide myself. I depend on my desires for my true identity, right? I don't even know what post I'm going to put this in. Anyway, much love. I'll see you next one. I'll give an update on the business in the next one.